Hello and welcome to October 22 meetup for OWASP Ottawa. My name is Garth, and I'm really happy to be here to introduce our speakers today. But before we do that, just a couple of notes from our public service announcements. First off, how to connect with us. We're on Twitter. We have our own Slack. We're on LinkedIn. And probably because you're watching this, you already know we're on YouTube. Um, we're really proud to be involved in B-Sides Ottawa on November 29th and 29th. Actually, that should be 28th and 29th. We're going to be running an OWASP track at B-Sides Ottawa. So like previous pre-COVID years, we're going to be in a room as part of the conference at the Brook Street. What else? Let's talk about membership. OWASP membership gives you a lot of access to a number of things, least of which is voting in the upcoming elections. But you also get a lot of perks in terms of training, in terms of cheaper access to conferences, and discounts at training. Quick shout out to our volunteers who help make this happen. And in addition, let's talk about that area called real life, and also what some may refer to as meat space. But yeah, seeing humans in person. It's a concept, and we're looking at returning to real life, hopefully in the new year. We found a venue. We're testing it out. I'm checking it out tomorrow to make sure we can have the right bandwidth. So please stay tuned. We're looking at a hybrid model where we will live stream from an in-person location. I'm not going to go through each one, but just for the month of October, here are the OWASP project updates that have occurred. There is a huge list, so go check them out. You may have heard of a tool called Zap, a number of updates, but their main GitHub repo has hit 10K stars, so that's quite a milestone. They're also taking part in Hacktoberfest. But enough about me yakking on about this. Let's introduce our speakers. This is a subject that I've had my eye on for some time, especially particularly since the Log4j party that happened last year. And it was really a case of, how do you know when something goes bad? It's kind of like mayonnaise in your fridge. You know it's there, but do you know if it's still good? Well, it's kind of the same thing with your applications and third-party tools. What have you got? Is it still good? Has it gone bad? And SBOMs are one of those things that I'd like to keep my eye on. So I'd like to welcome Teresa and Eddie, and this is an old slide. It's we've had a chat about this as I virtually cringe here, where I just haven't updated all my slides to the right name. So Teresa, and we'll assume that when Eddie becomes a Canadian citizen, he will change his name to Eric. Are going to join us to talk about SBOMs. So Teresa is a developer advocate. She's a computer engineer. She's an open source contributor and has a background in JVM and compiler projects, but she's also, and this is really important, involved in animal rescue. Whereas Eddie, also known as Eric, is a software and cloud engineer. He has a fintech background. I don't want to hear any cryptocurrency suggestions, and a open source software contributor. He enjoys spending his time being terrible at woodworking and uncreative writing. So Eddie and Teresa, welcome.
Thanks, Garth. I appreciate that you gave me a Canadian name. It makes me feel very, very welcome. Thank you for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull up a slide real quick that Teresa's got. Once that slides up, Teresa and I are going to start telling you a little bit more about our background and what we've been doing recently. But for the few of us who are here in chat and are not overcome with the Ottawa sense of the town that fun forgot, you can get past that and get involved in chat. We're going to throw up a question, and it's going to really, really help me because actually my portion of this is entirely dependent on you guys actually providing some sort of response to this question. Teresa, do you have I think you're running the slides right now. As soon as you can kick that. How do I make the slide go? Slides go.
They were there before. Oh, wait a minute. There they
just flashed. That was good.
Ah,
okay, cool. So we got that up. If you guys could please just hop into chat and tell us a little bit about your experience. Oh, bye, Garth. Tell us a little bit about your experience in managing dependencies. Any snippets that you can give would be super helpful. And just anything about yourself that you want to share in chat. That'll actually give me something to work with for my portion of the presentation. And Teresa's got the rest of the presentation. She's got some really, really cool material that she's going to walk us through. But before we get to that, Teresa, could you please just share with us a little bit about your background, where you're coming from, and if you can hold 2 questions in your memory, I know you can. What have you been doing most recently?
Sure. So apologies, I'm a little bit sick, so hopefully I won't be popping through.
Travel life.
Yes. So as Garth alluded to, I've been working in the Java runtime space for a little while, and I'm most heavily embedded in that community. But these days, I spend a lot more time talking about application security and kind of how to do that well in the Java language, and also using the Java platform effectively to do that. As well as, because of the company I work for, Sodatype, talking about dependency management as well. So all areas of the software supply chain. And the last few weeks, I have been, busy on the road, basically doing just that, going around and giving talks at a few different Java events. It is currently high season. Typically, I am based in Canada, though, and in Toronto, and I lived in Ottawa for a few years. Great city, despite the reputation, but I had a good time. What about you, Eddie? What are you up to?
Okay, yeah. So let's just rebound the question right back at me then. So I come from a software engineering background. I started out in web dev, like a lot of us did. I got bored with web dev, or got bored of being bad at it because I didn't design things very well. Focused on back end and transitioned into automation engineering. Actually got to work in a data center for a little while, which is pretty cool. And ended up kind of segueing myself into infrastructure engineering, infrastructure as code really, and spent some time inside a bank doing SRE. So that was pretty fun. And recently I've transitioned into developer relations, which has freed me up to not speak as much as Teresa does, but I actually have been spending all my time in open source contributions. I'm a maintainer for FinOS, which is the financial technology fintech open source foundation. It's part of the Linux Foundation, the financial vertical of the Linux Foundation. And most recently, Teresa, you passed this off on me so you could go travel the world. We've been doing the Security Slam. This is with the CNCF. We've been working with several different projects. 13 different projects from the CNCF have signed up for a Security Slam, where we've been doing a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about tonight and more, to just secure the open source projects themselves and create a lot of visibility into the security that is in those open source projects. And so that's been really, really fun. It's had me able to contribute to projects like Argo CD and Chaos Mesh and some other like really big fun projects that I've gotten to contribute to recently, which has been really, really, really fun. Did I answer the question to your satisfaction, Teresa?
I think you did, yeah. And I think the work you've been doing with the CNCF community is going to be really interesting to hear about, because you've been kind of really diving deeply into that some of those dependency management best practices.
It's been wild because every single project's so different. And in just a few weeks, getting to see how so many different projects are handling them has been absolutely wild. Teresa, do you mind if I transition into looking at some of the responses we got from chat?
Yeah. Let's do it.
So Garth was actually the first. Garth, did you prepare this ahead of time? I think you had a canned response because I warned you about the question. Garth said that he spent an entire weekend hunting down Log4j installs. And after that, he realized how important it is to automate that process. Dwayne says he hasn't been securing dependencies. Got a little frowny face in there. Just rule number one is avoid npm. I guess that's something. DAG is talking about SAST with SCA. That's crap. Composition analysis, code analysis. What is SCA? Because I say it so often as SCA, I never read it out loud. Static code analysis.
Right. Yeah.
Static code. All right. DAG, you got me. Okay, so DAG's looking at finding out how to generate SBOMs in the build. That's really cool. I'm going to pull up some examples. So at the end of the talk, I can actually just show off a few different examples of how some people are doing it in CI. So that'll be fun. I'm going to write that down so that way we don't forget that DAG. Patrick has been doing the OWASP dependency check. Shout out to OWASP. That's nice. You've been doing that in CI. And yeah. And okay, so this is actually something I would say is good. I don't like auto remediation. I like manual remediation. So Patrick has been using the OWASP dependency check to actually find out what needs to be remediated and then filing the issues and following through with them. It's not as fast, but I believe it's a lot more thorough and a lot more reliable. That's one man's opinion. And Pocket Java, I like that. Pocket Java has not spent much time with dependencies either. Ad hoc checks when something big. Yeah, that's pretty standard. This is how a lot of us have been doing it for a lot of time. Software composition analysis. DAG. I was wrong. I was right, then I was wrong. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I was wrong at the end of the day because I forgot. I always say the abbreviation and I never say it out loud. So that gives us a little bit of context about what everybody's been doing. And I'm going to try and find out a little bit more to show you guys some examples after Teresa goes through her talk. Teresa, did any of that stand out to you? Like anything uncommon that you heard from what everybody's been doing recently?
I think it sounds like common questions that I've been hearing as I've been going around, and some of which I think are trying to be answered in this talk. So hopefully it will be somewhat useful into the approach that at least I recommend to start thinking about in managing dependencies. Yeah.
So this is going to be the last thing I say before I hand it off to you, Teresa. But this topic can feel pretty canned sometimes. If you let it feel canned, what I would really encourage you to do is think about your environment, think about your code base, and think about your political structure and the things that are going on in your social ecosystem, because we've got both things that affect how we're able to influence change. And kind of like hold that in your head as Teresa's going through her presentation. There's going to be 3 different points in the presentation. Is that right? We have 3 different Q&A spots where we're just going to pause. If it's more or less than 3, then you guys can you can each slap me 1 time for the number that it is outside of 3. That's good. I'll take the digital slaps. Teresa, let's hand it over to you and talk through this. I'm going to stop my camera and just let you take over from here. Thanks, Teresa.
Okay. Sure, let's get started. I think Eddie made a good point that it can start to feel a little general talking about this topic just because it is really individual to every kind of organization and project and how things are done. And I think Eddie will be able to show some good examples afterwards about kind of what he's been seeing, kind of helping various open source projects get some of these solutions off the ground, which is great. But the goal of this talk is kind of to give drill down a little bit more into kind of the concepts behind some of the tools that are being marketed as being helpful for dependency management to help be able to make some slightly better decisions about what's being chosen, basically. So it sounds like most people right now are familiar with the fact that at least the challenge of managing dependencies and transitive dependencies is an issue. So I won't go too far into that, but we live in a world where we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and so as a result, bring in a lot of libraries and dependencies and tools into our software to help build them. And that really just means that we're not just working with a very small team of application developers, but in fact, those applications are written by an extended world and ecosystem of people. And so actually, it turns out that about 90% of code in applications and software applications are not written by the application developers at all. It is something that is being pulled in to be helpful, basically. And as a result, the kind of modern digital applications start to look a little something like this, where because build tools are abstracting away so much of the complexity that it's really challenging to know what exactly is in there. And that can be a really great thing for productivity. But when it comes to security, that is not so much. So Log4j, as Garth already mentioned about, was a really great example of this. So if you're assuming most people have at least heard of Log4j, the XKCD, I think a lot of security supply chain people are using that one now. But so if you're not familiar with Log4j, just a brief overview. It's a logging tool that's used all over the Java community. I've been using it for a long time myself. And the vulnerability that came into play was basically if some user information was being logged in a system, so for example, my name, and a hacker could figure out how to do that, they could exploit that by using a feature in the JDK called JNDI, which is basically a way of doing a lookup. And that lookup could actually be used to call to a remote server and get a foreign class back to Java, and then kind of run whatever code gets sent there. This is unfortunately due to another feature in Java called serialization, which is kind of classically unsafe due to the fact that there are kind of limited checks in what type of data can get pulled into the library. So that was Log4Shell that happened last year, but the real challenge. Oh, hello, Garth. The real challenge of
interface problem.
Oh, that's okay. So the real challenge of what happened with Log4j was the fact that, first of all, it was so popular, but also that it was fairly easy to exploit. And Log4j is so popular that there's about 7 million downloads of this project every single week. So that's quite a lot. And since everyone used it, this was a highly publicized as well. Even my friends and family that are not technical at all were asking me about it, since they know I work on something called Java. And despite that, so these are download statistics from Maven Central, which is sort of the NPM of the Java community, if you're not familiar with it. And basically, this data actually just came out in the State of the Software Supply Chain report this week. But what we're seeing was that about a third of downloads, throughout this last year, it's been almost a year since the Log4Shell vulnerability was publicized. About a third of the downloads are still vulnerable versions. So why is that? It wasn't because people didn't hear about it. It was really just because of that transitive dependency problem and the mishmash of libraries and build tools that we currently have in the system. So again, there was warnings issued by governments saying that there will be legal action if if it's not remediated, but it still wasn't always possible to do so, and still really hasn't been completely dealt with. The way I like to think of dependency management now is like Yarnball, as my title suggests, or I think my most recent and more cringy example is like that tangled ball of Christmas lights that you pull out before the holidays that is just, you don't want to deal with, and it's basically impossible to untangle. And real dependency graphs look pretty similar as well on the right there. They can get really complicated. So just wanted to clarify, probably most of you are already familiar with these terms, but when I talk about transitive dependencies throughout this really isn't referring to the libraries that are being pulled in directly by an application that are used for functional purposes. It's the libraries that those libraries depend on, but you don't explicitly call. So software can sort of be thought of as a supply chain. And the types of attacks that are becoming more and more prevalent are these sort of third-party libraries attacks. Because as I mentioned earlier, Log4j, for example, has 7 million downloads a week. So instead of targeting a single application, it can be a lot more effective for potential bad actors to go looking towards those very widely used libraries instead of more downstream in the finished goods. And so that's basically going in and targeting those NPMs, those PyPIs, and those Maven Central downloads. And I like to visualize it as a Niagara Falls, where that impact is really being maximized if you're starting at the top of the waterfall and going down. I do show this slide when I'm not in Canada too, but it's my little shout out to my country that I live in. And it's actually not just, existing used libraries that are being attacked. Because there's so much incentive and so much impact for these types of attacks, there's actually new types that are being created as a result. So things like typo squatting, for example, which is a really interesting one. Because if you've ever gone, to your command line and typed in, try to install a package name from memory and got it a little bit wrong, somebody may have gone to your NPM and uploaded that package in the hopes that you forgot the name just a little bit, and it could be installing some malware instead. Dependency confusion is a way of hijacking a maintainer's account potentially for a project upload and then uploading a new version that might get automatically downloaded as an upgrade. So there are all kinds of issues with dependency management that could potentially happen, and ways that applications are being exploited by using libraries that possibly the organizations don't even know are existing, like those pesky transitive dependency log4 shells that are still very much out there in the wild. And actually, another study that I've seen that I think is pretty interesting is that showing that about 70% of the time software developers are making kind of bad choices about these when they're upgrading dependencies. And that is based on quite a few things. Some of them are more or less obvious than others. So, some of it's don't upgrade to a vulnerable version. Seems obvious, but when your dependency graph gets really complicated, that can be challenging to know exactly which pieces are always moving. And there's other kind of less obvious things to be considering, like when upgrading, are you choosing versions that are common upgrade patterns to minimize breaking code changes? The point is that if 70% of all dependencies that are upgraded, are being done suboptimally, then we're not ready for the next log4shell type of incident. And even when it is possible to be prepared, like, it's still hard to keep up. There was another study that I like showing that, when you're supposed to actually upgrade dependencies. Yes, in fact, we will be talking about that quite a bit in this talk. But actually, so just after log4shell was released, there was bad actors kind of scanning the network looking for vulnerable versions pretty quickly before it was even possible for most teams to be able to respond. That's, if you were prepared, maybe you could think about doing this. So the way I like to think about all of this is actually upgrading dependencies does have a lot to do with it, because it's not just enough to be able to identify where things are going wrong, but part of battle is also to be able to remediate it quickly. And so, by being able to upgrade dependencies often and quickly and having it being kind of a routine thing makes that a little bit easier. And having, a pretty quick way to build and deploy a new system is really important as well, so that you're probably not going to beat that 15 minutes of scanning, but the faster you are to be able to upgrade, the better. But it really starts at, choosing dependencies in a little bit smarter way that considers security. So I think when looking at new dependencies, whether they're open source or whether they're paid, we're actually going to stop for chat questions if there were any. I think I kind of addressed them, though. Are there any questions so far? Oh, Eddie's gone.
I think we're good so far.
Okay.
There's banter. There is banter, like, oh, we're supposed to upgrade dependencies. It's like the cow brand baking soda in your fridge. Oh, was I supposed to change it?
Yes, exactly. All right, cool. We'll continue going then. Yeah, so in terms of choosing new dependencies wisely, I think there's, the really obvious things to look for, like, is it fulfilling the engineering requirements I need? Is there decent training and documentation for ease of use and for onboarding new engineers, or support if that's kind of the requirement? Is the licensing acceptable? Is there a decent amount of project activity and quality contributions? Are all things that can contribute to project health. But when it comes to security, there's some different questions to consider. And these, some of these points actually came from the OSSF has a document that I linked here about best practices for choosing dependencies. But things like, how quickly does the community react to new vulnerabilities? Is there evidence that developers are working to make the library more secure? Things like, are they validating their inputs in the code, for example? And then their number one recommendation is, can you just not use it if possible? Like, maybe there's a transitive dependency that accomplishes the same thing that you can use to just limit that attack surface. One of the ways that I've been seeing a lot in open source communities start to do is be a little bit more transparent about the ways that they are using best practices about security. So one of the things I'm seeing more often is the OpenSSF scorecard kind of stamp on a GitHub page. And that really is just helping improve the trust and showing that that is something that the project cares about and is working towards. All right, so kind of the first step is, making some better choices and more informed decision with new dependencies. But, in order to make sure that those new dependencies aren't making things worse, there also needs to be kind of a baseline of knowledge and understanding about what is in that tangled web of Christmas lights of transitive dependencies. All right. And so we touched on in the chat a little bit earlier, but one of the types of tools that's kind of exists coming out more and more, there's many of them right now, is the software composition analysis tools. And those do a decent job, some of them, of scanning software applications. Some of them, are as simple as going in and looking at call them POM files in Java, but a manifest file, and seeing what dependencies exist there. And some of them are a little bit more thorough and do things like, download the whole library and kind of see what trickles down along with it in order to figure out transitive dependency. These are great tools. They can also offer, some recommendations on code quality and security best practices, which is awesome. I think the challenge here is that a lot of these tools will give kind of different advice because they do things a little bit differently. So if you run 2 or 3 different tools on the same application, you might get some slightly different results, which can be a little bit challenging. This is just an example of, one might look like showing, oh, there's some critical vulnerabilities in here. So not only is it kind of identifying what's there, but also showing, hey, maybe you should upgrade your log4j version, basically. So the data that a lot of these pull from is from a CV, like public CVE databases, like this one. But there's many of them. Basically, the thing that I like to point out here is, so a lot of the free tools are using that, and that's great. However, that doesn't really cover the whole story. And the reason for that is that, kind of touched upon earlier, is that there's a lot of incentive for actors to, not publicly disclose security vulnerabilities. So it's not going to be the full story always with, these types of tools, but the point is, going in the right direction and doing as much, remediation as possible. All right. So the next level onto this is SBOMs, of course. And this is really kind of filling that gap of, well, not all of these tools are really getting the same dependency maps, and things could be conflicting depending on what type of technology I'm running. So this is basically, the concept comes from the manufacturing industry of, when you ship a car, you have a detailed list of each of the parts that come with it, so that if something goes wrong, there's a safety issue, it's possible to issue a recall, say, or do something about it, or know exactly what happened. So that's the same concept with software and the bill of materials, being able to understand, basically, from the security standpoint at least, if you're taking in a library, understanding exactly what transitive dependencies are being used there, so that it's possible to understand what security is being taken on there. And this concept's been around for a while, especially in licensing. And I know you guys are in Canada, but I think a lot of this did spur last year in the US an executive order talking about improving cybersecurity in the US, and sometime in the future actually requiring SBOMs for federal vendors. And I know that Canada has also been working on some legislation around cybersecurity as well, so that's exciting, and it seems to be popping up in a lot of other countries as well. And as I mentioned before, since 90% of components in enterprise applications are from open source or third-party dependencies, likely the rest of the community is following suit as well, because these are going to be used in a lot of and are used in a lot of critical applications already. Wait a minute. Okay, this isn't the slide that I thought was going to be here, but let's take a break for questions.
Let's add Eddie, who has to turn on his camera, unless he's pretending to be Eric right now.
Oh, hey.
And we will pose a question, and Patrick asks about this transitive thing. It's sort of like losing socks in your dryer. They go into another dimension, and then somebody else has the socks. So, here we'll have 3 or 4 different pairs of socks, because you're all dealing with these transitives for the same thing.
Yeah. So some languages are going to have a built-in to prevent like literally importing the same thing multiple times. So literal redundancies you're going to be pretty safe from that. But Patrick pointed out like 3 or 4 different JSON parsers. I'm not familiar with any tools that are going to identify the purpose and identify redundant purposes within the packages. Although, dep check is going to be pretty helpful from NPM if you're dealing with that side of the world. That might get you close, but it's not going to deal with like literally what you're talking about there, Patrick. I can't help with that. Teresa, do you have any ideas?
I'm not familiar with one either, but in kind of Java, that's an issue that has existed for a long time, and that it is very much possible to have multiple of them, and that could be a perfectly correct application. It's not great, but that is unfortunately the jar hell world that we live in that space. So that is a great question, but I'm not sure about that one.
Guess you got your multi-million idea there, Patrick.
So
go cash it in.
Really, this is a case where we have a bunch of different libraries pulling in essentially the same functionality, but with no conformity in terms of API. There's no indicator that they are the same thing, even though they provide, on balance, most of the same functionality. And so from a technological point of view, being able to try to identify, here's Daryl and his other brother Daryl. You'll never be able to identify that unless they are conforming to some API standard. And then, at that point, in a JVM case, you're looking at, well, how you would be able to recognize that they're conforming to a JCE or a JSSE or some other API standard. In other environments, whether it's Python or Go or it's not clear to me whether or not that capability would be there. So I think we'll be looking to Patrick's startup in the near future.
Yep. Although Dag's already voting against you, it looks like, Patrick. He's saying just do it manually. So that's what looks like. You got your first detractor, which is, I think, a fast track to success if I've been watching all the movies correctly. All right, Teresa, are you good to keep going? I know we're kind of losing your throat here. We might need to speed up so that way we can actually have you until the end of the presentation.
Sure. Yeah, I'm good. That was the long part, I think.
Ooh,
so
right. That means you have a chance at winning the opera competition afterwards.
Oh, that's good. All right, thanks, Teresa.
All right, cool. So moving on, that is the part of knowing what's in the application and things to look for in tools. And really the other part of this that I've already touched on a little bit is those pesky continuously upgrading dependencies, and checking for vulnerabilities when they come around, because unfortunately, which isn't going to be news to all of you, there's not really a happy ending here when it comes to cybersecurity, and 0-day vulnerabilities are only becoming more and more frequent. So continuously upgrading is obviously awesome, because it helps keep up with technical debt. As I mentioned earlier, following common upgrade patterns can reduce the risk of having things break. It's great for things like retaining engineering talent. Engineers love to learn new things and use the latest tech, at least when it comes to hiring as well. And there's also safety in numbers when actually when it comes to using libraries. So something that has the most number of eyes on it is likely going to be the safest, not necessarily the newest thing. And this is a study I like, again, from the State of the Software Supply Chain report, just to kind of show that it really is important to be doing this upgrades in like a smart way with an SCA tool. So there's the living in disarray, the never upgrading anything, which is problematic because then when a log4shell type of event happens, it then is a humongous event that is not likely going to go over well when trying to remediate. But then there's the opposite extreme, which is always using the latest and greatest version all the time. And that's not necessarily that great either. It can use up a lot of potentially unnecessary developer cycles, but then also could potentially leave applications vulnerable as well. I mentioned earlier that, a lot of those common dependency upgrades are doing something obvious like upgrading to a vulnerable version. So doing something in the middle, using those SCA tools to be able to make slightly more informed decisions is really kind of the sweet spot there. The other part of it is, automating those things like SBOMs I mentioned before. So that's something that's going to change with every dependency upgrade and change to an application. And it's something that, is going to be necessary to have potentially for users, and also when something goes wrong. So really that's kind of the heart of the next step in thinking about. So having, an SBOM one time is an awesome first step and is difficult, but really having it as a continuous way is really the golden way to start doing that. At the end of the day, things are still going to happen. It's not going to be a perfect system because, there's a lot of money that is in cybercrime at the moment, and there's always going to be people that are finding the latest and greatest ways to exploit applications. But, having sort of this type of system in place does make it a little bit more routine to be able to solve those transitive dependency attacks and when they come about. So having an SBOM makes having kind of, the Bible of what's in my application makes it a little bit easier to be able to know what's there and not have those 33% of log4j downloads being still vulnerable. Continually upgrading, but smartly, makes it a little bit more of a routine when it comes time to patch, potentially, and just being more conscious of choosing products that do care about security, and open source projects that are thinking about those things will hopefully make it possible that when something does happen, that they will have your back there. So that is pretty much all I have. That is kind of the process. So I don't know if we had any more questions, and I think if Eddie comes back at some point, he has some other more practical stories to tell you as well from his time with the
stay with me just in case you can answer some of these questions well, because sometimes my question answering is not the most flawless, and Garth being here to answer some too will be just absolutely flawless. So I am going to keep my promise to you, Dag. But before I show you some examples of how we're building SBOMs in CI platforms and stuff in CNCF, I want to check chat and see what other kind of questions we got. Actually, Garth, you wanna moderate the any questions that are coming in? I hope
Well, I
questions.
had my question.
Please, Garth, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's my other brother Garth. Yeah, I've obviously heard and continue to hear about, oh, here is this bogus malicious package in npm or PyPy or whatever, and obviously somebody has found it, somebody's spent time at that. But I'm wondering more as a top level thing, what is there any attempts to continually scan and cull from the herd any of this, the obvious malicious packages that are uploaded? Like some app stores will control to some degrees viciousness whether a app is added to the store. Would there be, is there any talk about something similar happening to?
Yeah, so yeah, got a quick answer for that one. Yes. So there's a difference between vulnerable and malicious. So, oh, I just did the thing where I looked at the wrong video and it freaked me out for a second. Sorry about that. So we've got a difference between vulnerable and malicious. You're talking about malicious. So before we talk about that and answer that directly with the easy answer, let's identify what we're not saying. Vulnerable packages like the log4j 4 versions back that is still being used by a third of deployments, like that doesn't get taken down because Maven Central, which our company actually hosts and makes available, has a policy that we don't take down stuff just for being vulnerable, because that would just crash everything, and instead we leave it up to the users to upgrade. The difference, the other one that you asked about, is malicious. So NPM, PyPy, and Maven Central all have a policy of taking down things that are malicious. And I'm most familiar with Maven Central because that's one that our guys talk about. But we actually have our research arm at Sonatype actually has direct conversations with PyPy and NPM's maintainers. And so when our security researchers find some obviously malicious packages that are typo squatting, or in NPM, you can just actually, I don't think it's NPM. Teresa, do you remember which one it is where you can just like go with I think it's NPM. You could just like put the latest version on there and just hijack, right? So there's some stuff that each of them have their own weaknesses to them. That's an absolute mess, and it's obviously malicious. You're obviously trying to take advantage of people. I'm not going to go deeper on that one because that was a sidebar, and I don't remember if it was NPM or not. But when those are identified, those are taken down, and the repository managers, the people who are managing Maven Central, NPM, and PyPy, will just talk to each other and just say, hey, we noticed 30 packages from this guy. Do you have him publishing over there? And they're like, oh, yeah, we do have him publishing. And so that's why you'll see the takedowns from PyPy and Maven Central just happen at exactly the same time, because they're just sending memos back and forth. I think that's what you're asking. Is that right, Garth?
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's good to know.
Yeah. That said, I mean, it's still really important not to rely on that completely, of course. I think that goes without saying. But
yeah, because they have to be found first.
Yeah. Yeah, or potentially, and for the sake of just keeping all of the vulnerable packages there, not taken down in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Vulnerable versus malicious. Malicious we can take care of once they're identified. Vulnerable, that's up to you. It's up to the users. Absolutely. So any other questions rolling into chat? Looks like we're good on chat, so I can hop on to Dag's question. Is that right?
Go for it. Which one was that?
So earlier, Dag he didn't explicitly ask it. He just stated a problem. He mentioned, and if you don't mind, I'll turn on my screen share over here. So Dag mentioned that he was in the process of automating the SBOM. Let me know once we get this.
Is that one?
Yeah. Wow. You are so good at this, Garth. It's freaking amazing. Yeah. So so I'll go ahead and screen share, and I want to walk through a couple different ways that this is being done in the CNCF right now. If we can get that kicked off, that'd be freaking beautiful. I can't tell if we have the screen share up. Oh, we do. Thank you, Garth. So first one, this is from Pixie. This is everything I'm going to show you is a CNCF project. So these are highly used, highly publicized repositories. So this is a reasonably acceptable thing to do. This is a publicly accepted thing to do.
Can just sorry to interrupt, but can you make it larger? The type is
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just scroll in there. So what Pixie's doing here, thanks for calling me out, Garth. What Pixie's doing here is they are just giving a link to where they've uploaded their SBOM. So every time that they make a new release, they are uploading it to a cloud storage somewhere. Oh, here. And they've got an endpoint on their cloud storage that is letting you do it. So this is something that would be possible with a manual generation of the SBOM. Something that we have that Teresa and I use pretty often is called Lift. It's from Sonatype. It's a free tool to where you can just go in there, click a couple buttons, and generate your SBOM. It's super easy to do, but it's manual, and you have to decide what to do with it afterward. Pixie is doing something similar to that. That's not what you're asking about, though. What Dag was asking about is automating this, and that is the recommended way to do it. If you remember the little SDLC infinity symbol that Teresa had in her presentation, she was saying the ideal state, the desired state, is to integrate this into your CI/CD. So there's another project. Ooh, and I didn't save the link. This is Flux. I think Flux is the one that's using this one. They're using a GitHub action. This is a third-party tool again, and they're integrating it into their CI pipeline and just following the documentation, and it's going to spit out a software bill of materials that they can then choose what to do with. And in their case, they're attaching it to their releases. Now over here, this is Argo CD. Argo is getting a little bit more complicated with how they're managing it. So this is a GitHub action, similar to a Jenkins pipeline or anything else. And what they're doing is they're actually using a tool that's published by SPDX. This is a third-party GitHub action, but it's from a highly reputable source. SPDX is widely supported by and highly funded, very secure, trustworthy resource that's providing this, which is why I would consider a little bit of an upgrade from this one, in that it is a more trusted party. So they're doing that, and then as you can see down here, they're actually signing it. They're using cosign to give you the ability to pull down that SBOM. And if you're a user of Argo CD and you care about these types of things, which, to be honest, most people don't, but in a mature environment, you would care about this. When you're pulling down Argo CD, you would want to know, am I getting the right resources? So you would automate checking that key. And so they're actually signing it and publishing it. And then the last one I wanted to show, this hasn't been deployed yet. Cilium, another CNCF project, is working on integrating the Kubernetes BOM. And so this one, you just got to go on the docs and look at what it's capable of. But this is another tool that's available. So manual, GitHub action, different GitHub action that is directly from SPDX. And then the Kubernetes BOM right here is a tool that's not necessarily GitHub action, but it's a tool that's provided by the Kubernetes maintainers. It's 4 different ways to get the software bill of materials available to your users with each release. I have now answered your question. Anything else on that topic? I've got a couple other notes that I pulled up during Teresa's presentation, but I'm going to just hover in the air here for a second in case anybody wants to drop questions in chat on this topic specifically.
Can you share those links for those examples?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll drop them in the chat, or you can drop them in the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to skip the Pixie example because that one's just to show, hey, this isn't totally crazy. And then actually, in my Slack, I have, so that's Argo. Who is using this one? Flux2. Yeah, Flux2 is using this SBOM action. So let's just go over real quick, run over here and find which code they're using it in. Probably release, right? And Go.
Well, I'm sure anything close would work, because then anybody can search from
I
there.
got it. There. That's the Flux example. This is the Argo CD example. And this is the Cilium not yet merged. Can't promise you it's totally correct, but it has a cosign with SigStore. So that's a pretty cool. SigStore is a really great technology. If you aren't familiar with it, go read the docs. It's great. Absolutely should be looking at SigStore. That's the three key examples there.
Right. You mentioned something that actually strikes me as obvious, but the signing of an SBOM that they distribute is important. So yeah, I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah. It becomes more important the more that your customers care about it, right?
Yeah, that is very much a best practice as well that I did not touch on. That not only is it important to have an SBOM, but to guarantee that your SBOM is not being tampered with and that it's actually coming from the right sources.
Yeah. Provenance for your packages and your bill of materials are both really, really important at every stage of life cycle. Got to have that package provenance. Absolutely. And we don't have anything else popping in on chat, so I'm going to go through 3 more links real quick, and then that's all I have. So this Teresa referenced is the C26 from the House of Commons Canada. This is, I believe, the most recent legislation on cybersecurity.
You're talking about something that's actually coming up for debate, is it not?
Yes, coming up for debate. I am curious to see where this one goes, but they are talking a lot about kind of supply chain security, so I think this will likely become a relevant topic as well. But
and then the next reference, I think you mentioned it in your presentation. We already have this link in chat. It's a little bit further back, but I'm going to drop it here at the end just one more time. This was released yesterday, so it's very, very recent. And this is the first time the State of the Software Supply Chain Report has had really cool visuals all the way through it. I love it. For somebody who actually has to read it, it's awesome. And Hillary Carter from over at the Linux Foundation wrote a foreword for it, which is super, super fun, and just kind of reminds us that real people are using this in real ways in the real world. This information is directly actionable for a lot of different industries. So this is really fun. So if you're wanting to know a little bit about just the general state of all of this stuff that Teresa's been talking about, this is a good, helpful link. It's a lot of research. It's very heavy reading, but there's visuals. Can't stress that enough. Colors and pretty pictures make everything more tolerable. And then the last thing, this was yesterday also. This is off topic completely, but I'm sharing it anytime I talk to anybody. There's a vulnerability in Git right now, so you need to update it. You need to update your Git right now. Like as of yesterday, they released the updates. So go to latest. I'm gonna drop this in here.
What's its vulnerability level? What's its CVSS?
Ooh, there's 2 of them. We got moderate and high.
High. Okay.
So that's a fun one. And that's everything I had to share. Garth, I guess back to you, sir.
Do you, other than we'll share the links in the chat for the examples, I will just keep an eye. Is there anything else in the chat for questions? We'll just sort of hem and haw and look at the suspended ceiling for a few minutes and talk about anything to see if there are any other questions other than Dwayne seems to be... I don't know whether he has a problem with his horse because he's going, whoa, or there's something else going on. Anyways, this has been awesome. So let me ask you this. What do you see in the, oh, that's about the Git thing. So thank you for that. What do you see in terms of industry uptake of SBOMs? Do you see as the new sensation? Is it is it tepid? What's the uptake like?
Yeah. Teresa, you can answer before me if you want, but I definitely have an answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, it's certainly something that a lot of at least open source projects are looking at, because with it at least required for some industries, it is going to be something that's kind of necessary to have for continued use in some possibilities. So I think it is going to have a lot of uptake in my opinion, and it is useful outside of just the government types of requirements as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Eddie.
You can use my Canadian name. Respond to both now, Garth. So the last thing that Teresa said was actually, like, I think the biggest point for me is that there is value outside of just the federal government requires it, and that value is really becoming possible with the tools that are surrounding. There's kind of an ecosystem that's coming in, and realize it's coming in around the fact that SBOMs are getting attention and they're becoming more required. Open source projects are the quickest ones to start picking this up in the process, right? Kubernetes implemented their stuff a year and a half ago. I think they started making their BOM tool available and implementing it internally. So this is something that's getting picked up really quickly by anybody that might be is forced to do it. But there's an ecosystem that's kind of coming in and forming around it. And Hillary actually makes a really good analogy. You should just go read the link that I dropped in there. But Hillary, wait, no, might not have been Hillary. In the introduction somewhere in that report, they compare it to seatbelts, which is that there was a point in time when wearing a seatbelt in a car seemed like a silly thing that you only did because you had to. And now all of us consider it just standard practice, normal safety. All of us do it unless you're like rebelling for some reason. And what we've seen around that is that now we have an ecosystem that's developed around seatbelts and is actually using them in ways that are not only related to I've got a car seat in the back of my car, right? So it's not holding the baby in, like the seatbelt's not holding the baby in, but we're utilizing the seatbelt as a tool in the car to actually lock down other things and provide safety in other ways, right? That's just one example that came to mind. The same thing is happening with SBOMs. We're getting tools that are coming in around it in the ecosystem that are creating value beyond just it's a federal requirement, but they're giving us visibility, and we're able to actually action things as developers, as engineers that are building software. When we start integrating these things into our ecosystem, we start getting visibility from the SBOM, and we get additional features from these tools that are coming up around in the ecosystem. So it is slow to adopt. There is hesitation, especially for internal projects. When you're like, I'm building something in my enterprise for my enterprise, like, yeah, you're not seeing conversation around SBOMs, but it's rising. It is definitely trending the way that seatbelts slowly trended into norm.
I'm glad you used the word ecosystem. So my concern is, and as we know in our industry, the nice thing about a standard is that there's so many to choose from. And this entire ecosystem is based around the creation of this artifact, an SBOM that has a schema and a defined schema. My understanding at this point is that we have a defined schema for an SBOM. How is that managed? How is that being maintained? Or will somebody take it and say, well, no, ours is better? And so then we get into this Coke, Pepsi, Mr. Pibb, Dr. Pepper, this entire
yes to all of those.
Are you this SBOM? Are you that SBOM?
Yes.
What SBOM do you have?
Yep. Cyclone DX and SBDX.
This SBOM.
Yeah, so the minimum kind of what it has to be, or sorry, at least kind of for the US, there's minimum requirements for what needs to be in an SBOM, but I guess Eddie was about to mention that the two standards that seem to be kind of taken over are the SPDX and Cyclone DX. But the exciting thing is that they are, I think, at some point going to be working towards being interoperable together, so that
wow.
should be possible to.
Yeah. So
There's one.
we've been able to be privy to some conversations where the leadership from SPDX and leadership from Cyclone DX are being brought to the table, and it's been ongoing. It's been an ongoing thing,
Right.
and you've got blame being cast on both sides. Well, we're not compatible because of you. We're not compatible because of you. But there's enough influence being leaned on the scales in the area of like, okay, it doesn't matter whose fault it is that you guys aren't compatible. When SPDX version 3 is released, it has to be compatible with Cyclone DX. Is the last understanding that I had on the topic.
Good. That's actually good to hear. Cross fingers.
Yes.
We won't ask who leaned on them, but they're working, on our behalf. So that's good. I'll just check if there's any more questions at this point. Well, we're actually 69 minutes into the presentation, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for spending the time to share with us. This has been an education, and I really look forward to seeing this develop, and so I don't have to spend a weekend trying to dig out whether or not a particular software is got a third party that's vulnerable somewhere buried in under the strata and have to go through an archaeological dig.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Garth. Keep redeeming Ottawa one laugh at a time, sir. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, and thanks everyone in the chat for participating as well.
Yeah, I depended on you guys for feedback, and you didn't let me down. Thank you, guys.
Good. And for the insomniacs in the crowd, I've left a link for Bill C-26. So hopefully everybody will get a good snore out of that. In terms of OWASP Ottawa, we will not be having an official November meetup because we will be doing the track at B-Sides Ottawa on November 28th, 29th, and 29th. And we might have a super secret stealth meetup that might be advertised to test out the new digs to see whether or not we can faff around with technology to get it working. So keep your eyes peeled for a non-official announcement, maybe that will be super secret. And until next time, again, thanks Eddie and Teresa, and I hope you both have a nice Eddie, I hope you have a nice Thanksgiving coming up next month. And Teresa, we'll tell customs to let you back in the country when you come back.
Thanks, Garth.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right.
Bye, guys.